These are the manifold gauges that you can purchase at Harbor Freight, and they got three hoses coming out. You got your blue, which is your low side, and your blue gauge, which will give your low side pressure, and it'll also read vacuum there. And then you got your yellow hose, which you use for, that's what you connect to your vacuum pump or your cans of refrigerant to refill the system. Then your red is your high side. And right here is a set of adapters that you can pick up at Walmart, or they come in a kit, like the kit to retrofit or whatever. And then this thing right here is what you hook up to your can that they sell at the parts store. This yellow hose here, when you connect your blue to your low side, which on my Jaguar, these fittings didn't fit upright, so I had a high side fitting that fit on my low side, and my low side one fit on the high side. So what you can do is you can just swap these out. They just screw right off of here, and you can switch them around and put the red on the blue side, but make sure that you can put this one on the red hose, then the red one on the blue one, and as long as you got the high and low side correct on the gauges, you'll be okay there. And these valves here, if you open this up, this will allow anything in this hose or on the low side to go into here. So if you open that up when you're filling it, you have this connected and you have a can on here. Then when you open this valve up, that'll allow the refrigerant to go back into the low side and fill it up. And if you take this yellow hose here and open these valves up with it just out, it'll relieve all the pressure off of the system. So if you stick it down inside of a bottle or something, it'll catch all the oil. The refrigerant will evaporate into the air, which is probably illegal, and I wouldn't say that you should do that because that's wrong. But if you did that, that's how it would keep the oil from getting all over the floor and spraying everywhere, but it'll let the refrigerant out, then you'll have an empty system. Right here is the inside of my vacuum pump. I took it apart because I was using it for something else, but you hook that up to your yellow hose there, and then plug this into your compressed air line, and it'll draw down a vacuum. You open the valves up on the gauges, and it'll pull all the air out of the system. Then you close these valves back up, and then unhook your vacuum pump from your air with the valves both closed, and it'll hold a vacuum on there, and you can look on the gauge, and it'll read to about 30 on the vacuum, and you leave it sit like that, and that'll tell you if you have any leaks in your system. But you can swap these around if you have to, but you got to make sure that you're real careful to get the high side and the low side correct if your fittings don't line up right. But I hope that explains the gauges. I'll put a link down below where you can get the gauges at, and any Harbor Freight store usually sells them for, I think, 40 bucks. I've had these for probably 4 or 5 years now, and I use them maybe once a month, and they're not real good gauges, but they work for occasional use. I hope that'll help you out.
Then stay tuned, because I'm going to show you how to use air conditioning gauges to analyze your air conditioning system. Now I know some people are going to say, oh, I don't want to buy all that equipment. But hey, I bought the set of gauges and hose, and it was 49 bucks at Harbor Freight Tools. Now the first thing you want to do is open the hood and hook up the gauges. And up it goes. Now there's a high side gauge that's red, and a low side gauge that's blue. And they only hook up one way because they're different size fittings. On this Toyota Tundra, the high side is right here. Cap. And put the fitting on. Oh, it snaps on. Then you turn the valve so the pressure goes to the gauge. And the low side pressure is right here next to the firewall. We'll just unscrew the cap and then snap it on. And again, you turn the knob down to open it so the gauge will work. Then start the vehicle and have the AC turned on full blast. And also roll down all the windows. Then let the system run for about 5 minutes so it cycles and gets itself running correctly. And if you have a big fan, stick it in front of the engine to help cool the air conditioning. Then read the pressures on the low and the high side, realizing that it's dependent on a lot of things like temperature, humidity, but you're looking for general readings. And in this case, the low side is about, 42 pounds, which is pretty normal. And the high side's about 195, which is also pretty normal. Okay, but I just fixed the system, so it better be normal. Now, before I fixed the system, here's what the readings were, and here's how I fixed it. Now, before I fixed it, the high side was about 145, But the low side, it was actually minus 5 pounds. It was negative pressure. Now when you have negative pressure on the low side, that means the compressor's sucking like mad, but it's not getting enough refrigerant, so it goes into negative pressure. And in this case, the evaporator core and the expansion valve were clogged up, causing the negative pressure. So I had to take the dash apart and replace both the evaporator and the expansion valve. Now here's another scenario you might see. In this case, the high side pressure is low, about 80 pounds or so, and the low side is just about the same pressure, 75 pounds. Now if both the high and the low side have about the same pressure when the compressor's running, that means the compressor's shot and it's not pumping anything. Now of course you want to make sure that the compressor's running if you have these pressures, so check it. Just shine a light in and look at the compressor. You can see the front is spinning, so it is working. So if it's spinning away and both pressure gauges show about the same reading, that just means it's not doing anything and it needs to be replaced. Now here's another scenario you might see. The low side is low, about 15 pounds, and the high side is low for the high side, about 100 pounds. Now the most common reason for that is you're just low on refrigerant. And with these modern 134A refrigerant systems, it's best to just evacuate all the refrigerant out and then put in a factory load of refrigerant. As the sticker says under the hood, 1.43 pounds. The amount of refrigerant in a modern refrigeration system is very critical. You don't want to just guess and add a little. You want to put in the exact amount, and that's the only way to do it correctly. The last set of readings I'm going to talk about is when the low side is high, in this case about 80 pounds, but the high side is low for the high side, about 110 pounds. Now in that case, it's often an expansion valve that's stuck open. So rather than restricting the flow of refrigerant, a lot of it just passes right through, so the pressure on the low side is way too high. And it also makes the high side too low because rather than building up pressure, it just flows right through and isn't restricted. And okay, I know, you're going to ask what's normal low and what's normal high. Well, as I said before, the pressures are also dependent upon the heat outside and the humidity. There's actual charts you can look up for really accurate readings. But on a hot day like today, it's about 92 out now and about 60% humidity. Then the low side should be between 35 and 45 psi on most cars. And the high side should be between like 195 and 230. So now you know how to use a $50 set of gauges to figure out what's wrong with your vehicle's air conditioning.